And, the strategy that they've been talking about so much is using these games that they're releasing to leverage their IPs to convince people to buy Nintendo's dedicated hardware, sort of buy up into Nintendo's ecosystem from Apple and Android kind of stuff, just simple mobile games. But, if they're going to do that, Miitomo, I can see why that is not at all the way to do that. Because, take, for example, like a Zelda shooting gallery based on the game shops in Castletown, or like Brain Age apps, Nintendogs on mobile. Stuff like that fits beautifully into the marketplace that's already been established for games on mobile platforms. And it would help promote their first-party IP because it's getting those IP into people's hands. The Zelda shooting gallery example would convince people, hey, this is fun. You can buy up into a huge Zelda adventure. Miitomo, on the other hand, has to, first of all, define its place in the mobile ecosystem, and second of all, manage to get people from the Miitomo app to Nintendo's hardware. Which, when it's not a dedicated game in this pre-established and sort of already understood way, it's just going to have a lot of trouble doing that.
Yeah, and that was the thought I had too, is, Nintendo's been talking so much about how they're going to use their mobile plans to leverage their IP and everything, and then they come out with Miitomo, and it's like, oh, this isn't going to convince people to buy a Wii U or a 3DS. But I think, you and Alex have brought up some good points about how maybe that's not what they're going for with this first one, but rather instead it's about getting people to create a Nintendo account who otherwise would not have created a Nintendo account. So rather than promoting hardware with Miitomo, it's more about promoting their network and then hopefully maybe building from there with future titles.
Yeah, and I can see that, and I think it would be great as that sort of tie-in, for their mobile ecosystem, convince people to sign up with the account, get people going on that service, which can sort of web out into their other games. But I think they would need to have several games out on the market first, or at least sort of released in a similar time period. Whereas, I don't think this is going to work in that way if they do it as their first game, because it sort of needs to tie into those other kinds of things. It needs to tie into the way that their account system works on their future hardware. It needs to tie into the way that their account system works for future mobile games that they're making. If they're just releasing this sort of cloud system first, then it's not going to have any of these other facets of its plan, like the hardware, like the other game software, to get people interested in this sort of platform. And so then it's going to launch. People won't be as interested in Miitomo because there's nothing else to show for it. And then, then when the other things come out, if those gain popularity, then when they tie into Miitomo, people are going to be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, I see a lot of those same problems too. Like, I think this has a lot of potential to be sort of like what Wii was for Nintendo and dedicated platforms, but for Nintendo and mobile platforms. Mm-hmm. But, with the way they've communicated so far and the way they kind of have this piece in place, but not a lot of the other pieces that they need to have a successful account ecosystem, I'm not so sure that it's going to do that. And it's certainly not going to do that out the gate. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of what we've seen with mobile apps in particular is when they're entertainment focused, they tend to sunset after a while unless they have a lot of engagement and the momentum is sustained. So I could see this fizzling out before it really has a chance to do what it's supposed to do, and that's kind of a shame.
Yeah. Well, I agree to an extent, but at the same time, I think, it would have been good to launch like a Mario game first and then maybe Miitomo a little later. But at the same time, they claim that their overall mobile plans are still on track, which means 5 games by March 2017. And they're going to launch their first one in March 2016, which is
Miitomo.
Yeah, but that means after Miitomo, that's an average of a mobile game about every 3 months. So I don't think it won't have to be alone on the market for too long before there's, maybe some other Nintendo app that comes out that is a little more substantial and that can, maybe show off a little bit more of what they have in mind and maybe connect to Miitomo.
Yeah, and I can see that. I just, at this point, I'm not sure that 3 months is a short enough window that Miitomo is going to be able to. But of course, again, it's too early to judge. We don't know anything about like what the final shape of Miitomo is going to be because they've got so much longer to work on it.
Right. Well, and to Alex's point about how, what if it fizzles out, that's obviously always a very, very real possibility with any sort of social game or mobile game or anything like that, it'll explode for a couple months and then just disappear. But Nintendo has said in quite a few different, investor meetings and interviews and so on and so forth that they're really focusing on games as a service and continually evolving the game over time, and that's why they brought DNA on as a partner.
Right.
So, hopefully that's what we'll see, but, it's a little hard to put your faith in that when we haven't even seen really much of what's going to be available at launch, much less, what's going to be added over time. But I'll say it's a positive sign seeing the way they've been able to support Splatoon and, to a lesser extent, Mario Kart 8, which is especially, relevant because Mario Kart 8's director is the person in charge of Nintendo's mobile division.
Yeah. And I think, what you're saying about, especially with like other games coming later, there's definitely merit to that. Rumors do say that like the big guns of IP are coming next year at some point, after, of course, Miitomo. But, again, when the point is to leverage Nintendo's own franchises and hardware, especially, off of the mobile platform, Mii's are going to just have so much more trouble doing that than these kinds of big gun franchise-based games would. Because, the point of Mii's is to be avatars that represent you and communicate with each other on Nintendo's hardware. Now that you can do that on mobile, Mii's won't be able to sell dedicated hardware by their brand. More dedicated games would be giving players a taste of gameplay from that franchise, then hooking them on that appeal and luring them into the bigger and better titles in that series. But the biggest and best title that Mii's have is Tamagotchi Life, and Miitomo already looks like it could be bigger and better than Tamagotchi Life. So, it's kind of this twofold, not failure, of course, because, again, we don't know what this is going to look like in the end, but this twofold problem where the Mii's won't be able to convince people to buy up, and because this is the first property that they're introducing on mobile, nobody will be buying up from mobile to their platforms, which is going to put a damper on the rest of their sort of plans to do that. Hello everybody, thank you for listening to this Nintendo Week Clip NWC. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to us here on YouTube for more highlights and discussion videos from Nintendo Week Podcast, or subscribe to us on iTunes for weekly breakdowns of all your Nintendo news, discussion segments on subjects, games, and more, and tons of other features. Thanks for listening, and we will see you tomorrow with another NWC.